Hey guys, my name is Shroomy. I have a lot of different names and I just really like lore. Well, my prayers have finally been answered. We got another Omnic hero, making it that we're at least getting 2 this year. This is a really big deal, and I wanted to give Shion her own little video to kind of talk about how crazy this is, but also kind of talk about her character so far. Now, this, at the time of me recording this, she has not gotten her origin comic yet. I'm unsure if she's going to get one, but we're going to be talking about kind of everything else with her backstory and how she interacts with the rest of the roster. Of course, as I say this, they're probably going to post the comic right after I record this, or maybe tomorrow, just my luck. But yeah, why is it such a big deal that she's an Omnic? Well, Shion is the first Omnic hero we've gotten since 2022. That's crazy. We should not have had to go that long without an Omnic hero, but I'm glad we finally got one, and she checks off every box that I wanted for another Omnic. The most important thing here is she is not a monk. Overwatch has had a big problem with how their Omnic heroes on the roster are treated. We only have 3, with Ramattra, Zenyatta, and Bastion. Ramattra and Zenyatta are, of course, Shambali monks, or ex-Shambali monks in some ways, and Bastion is kind of his own little exception in the corner. Now, Orisa and Echo, you might ask, are they Omnics? No, they're robots. They were created after the Awakening happened, which was the signal Aurora sent out, making all these robots come alive. The term Omnic changed after this, from robot to awakened being, in a sense. So, they don't really count here, so I'm probably not going to be talking about them too much more. It's also really important to bring up here, she's not a monk, but also she's a female Omnic hero. This is something we haven't had in all of Overwatch, and it's something I've desperately wanted. Now, we're going to be talking about her design later because I do have some critiques with it, but overall I really do like what they went for here, and I think it all really works. The third thing on my box checklist I like to go over is I'm just happy that we got another Omnic DPS. Bastion has been our only Omnic DPS for the entirety of Overwatch, and now we finally have one. As well, I'm happy that we have an Omnic who's connected to human characters instead of solely Omnic characters. It's kind of refreshing to see an Omnic character who exists to just, well, exist. Omnics have had this issue in the narrative for a long time, where it feels like all of them have to pick a side on Ramatra's perspective of things, where Omnics are against humanity or they're with humanity, and I've never really agreed with that. I'm glad we're getting more Omnic perspectives on things, because, well, of course, Shion has a really interesting perspective on Ramatra. She has voice lines in-game with him, where basically she says she doesn't really care about what he's doing, and she doesn't think the world will ever truly be at peace like he wants. Another thing to point out as well is, speaking of Ramatra, you would think he doesn't like her, but, well, he actually cares about her a lot. He sees all Omnics as his brothers and sisters, so seeing her and what she's had to do to kind of survive over here in Japan has kind of broke his heart, at least in these interactions that we got in-game. But those are my big points that I wanted to bring up. I'm just really happy we finally got this character. She's pretty much perfect for what I wanted. Now, let's talk about her design. I've seen a lot of critiques online that people don't really like the humanoid aspect of it, and I do 100% agree. A big thing with Omnics is they do have that kind of robotic, angular face, and of course, Shion is wearing a mask. Now, her hero trailer does have the mask kind of animate, but also her eyes move, kind of facial features going off. She opens her mouth at one point. That's just in the hero trailer. In-game, she doesn't actually move her face at all. This is something I wish was more consistent. It's kind of an issue with all of her appearances so far, but it's been confirmed in a couple different places with developers. This is a mask, so we shouldn't be expecting this to be moving a lot, and it kind of breaks the immersion they were going for. Now, the idea I think they were trying to go for was this creepy Omnic/human, what does it mean when the two merge? And I do think they land that in the in-game model. However, in the animated stuff, like the Mizuki comic that just came out, and of course the hero trailer, I think it really misses the mark. And I really wish they would have kind of focused more on that and made her a little bit more creepy, because, man, this character and backstory truly deserves it. I do think her backstory is probably only second to Ramatra in terms of the newer heroes. It is on a whole other level, and I'm definitely going to be getting into that in a bit. I really love the Hashimoto kind of logos and symbolism all over her body. You can really see how she's made this human organization her own and reshaped it from the ground up. Of course, her pistols being Anima tech as well, showing that connection she has with Toshiro and how she forced him to make those guns, but they aren't exactly like any of the other Anima tech weapons, so it shows how she forced him to make it and how they kind of don't work the same way as other ones. I think her design is really good. My only real critique, like I said, is I kind of wish she had a little bit more of that Omnic face going on, but that kind of thing would get resolved if we got more female Omnic heroes. The detective, who is assumedly going to be an Omnic coming out this year, is probably going to look more like Zenyatta and Ramatra. So I hope whenever we get another female Omnic, because I'm begging that we do next year, we get a more traditional looking one. Hopefully when we get that, Shion won't be looked as badly on. I don't look at her badly, but I know a lot of people do in the community because of that. But her backstory is all available on the website, so I'm going to be giving little lore blurbs about that and reading it out, and then I'm going to be explaining the little sections. The first section is called Awakened in Conflict. In many parts of the world, the awakening led to a peaceful ceasefire, but in Tokyo, terror and confusion only led to further conflict. Shion's own awakening was scored with screams and gunfire as she dug herself free from the casualties of war. Knowing only danger and death, Shion fled from the wreckage and kept fighting. Shion survived for weeks on the streets in a state of fear, killing anyone she encountered. Meanwhile, tensions and resentment still defined the relationship between Omnics and humans in Tokyo, and the local gangs took to the streets to mistreat and hunt down Omnics as a form of justice. Eventually, a group of these criminals, humans who would go on to found the Hashimoto clan, defeated Shion and took her captive. So, yeah, this is already a pretty stark contrast to just about every other character we've gotten in Overwatch 2 aside from Ramatra. So far, every Overwatch hero has gotten a really almost not peppy, but kind of more upbeat or hopeful, optimistic future kind of vibe to them, with some exceptions here and there like Vendetta, obviously. But yeah, for the most part, it's been a lot more hopeful, and a lot of these human characters haven't really had to go through anything nearly as bad as Shion has. There are certain aspects about this that I think is a really interesting dynamic. It's something that you can immediately contrast with how Ramatra awakened, which he also woke up on a battlefield, and he also got to see all of his brothers and sisters fall around him. But another character I want to contrast this with is Maximilien. We know from Maximilien's short story, he awoke on a battlefield as well. And while he wasn't hunted, he did have to kind of enter human society and made an empire for himself. Max and Shion both have those kind of humanoid aspects to them, but they go about it in very different ways. Where Max kind of just adopt how humans look, Shion has fully taken that and molded into her own thing, which I think is a really cool difference between the two, and it makes me want to see how they would react. I feel like they would be kind of a dynamic duo in some ways and really vibe with each other. Anyways, here's part 2, Kept in Chains. Rather than kill Shion, the Hashimoto saw her potential as a way for them to gain power. They decided to train against her, honing their fighting techniques. If the Hashimoto were to become Tokyo's deadliest blade, she would be the steel they sharpened against, a killer with machine-like precision, but an unpredictable, sentient spark. For Shion, the war raged on, relentless in its cruelty, but secretly, Shion held back, pulling her punches and learning her captor's weaknesses, so she might someday overtake them. In all that time, Shion only saw glimpses of the outside world. Treated poorly by the Hashimoto, she knew herself not as an Omnic, but as an inhuman, and had little opportunity to gain sense of self. Shion had long since conquered any fear of her captors. Violence, in its consistency, had almost become a comfort, but she had to believe there was more to life than survival. If she wanted anything, it was to be free from her imprisonment, and to punish those who kept her in a cage. Yeah, even more crazy as this goes on. So this is probably the darkest Overwatch backstory, I think, period, especially after the second part. You can kind of compare this to what some other more dark backstories are, like Wrecking Balls or Ramatra's, but hers is definitely the worst. As soon as she awoke, it was something that's kind of mentioned in Overwatch Declassified, the lore book a bit. A lot of Omnics had to deal with this, but we didn't really know how Tokyo landed on it specifically. Sounds pretty terrible though, and one of the worst cases of it in the world. What's interesting about all this is, in present day, places like Paris and London seemingly are way worse towards Omnics, whereas Tokyo and Japan is kind of calmed down, but that could be because of people like Shion kind of working from the shadows. I would love to see that explored in her character more, and how she kind of feels about how everything is in Japan. We don't really get an idea of how she feels about the grand scope of things here. But it's really cool to see the early days of the Hashimoto and kind of how they were formed. Shion obviously has been through so much, and it makes complete sense why she would be hardened by it all and come out as this almost unkillable machine. But her story really ramps up in the final chapter, Risen from Blood. In time, Shion's captors, now revered elders in the clan, grew complacent and dropped their guard in her presence. Shion saw her opportunity and broke free, leaving a trail of death in her wake that ended with the murder of all 4 Hashimoto elders. Finally, Shion had control over her own fate. She quickly realized her chance at power, creating a 5th seat on the Council of Elders for herself, and forcing those she had spared to fight for the chance to rule by her side. Using her newfound wealth and power, Shion transformed herself, modifying her chassis to suit her desire and crafting a mask that would instill fear. The result was something uncanny, neither human nor Omnic. She belongs in no world other than the one she creates for herself. Shion lives life to the fullest, gaining a reputation for excess as she indulges in fashion, lovers, and custom motorcycles. Among the Hashimoto, Shion's murderous ascent is well remembered, and her penchant for punishment is widely feared. As a show of this power, Shion forced Toshiro Yamagami, a weaponsmith imprisoned by the Hashimoto, to craft her a unique pair of Anima pistols. With these weapons and Vendetta's backing, the Hashimoto rule over Tokyo is all but assured. This all just kind of goes back to the idea of how Omnics really are treated in this part of Japan, but also how she really did shape the Hashimoto into what they are today. There's been a couple points in her backstory so far, especially in the Mizuki comic that came out a little bit ago, Facing Demons, where we were wondering where she sat in terms of hierarchy. It seems like she's on the council, but she's definitely the most important vote of the elders. What I'm curious about is how she feels about everything with the Shimada clan. This is something she hasn't really focused on at all, other than just a general dislike for them. I'm wondering if she's got any of those feelings or resentment that have kind of rubbed off on her from those around her, or if it's more like work to her, and she just wants to get them out of the way. It's really cool too, she made her own seat on the Council of Elders. In Hanzo's short story from a while ago now in Heroes Ascendant, we got to see some of the other elders in that, not by name, but I think there was about 3 or 4 of them in there, so this does track. Lastly, her crafting the humanoid face, trying to instill fear, I think works best in-game with her kind of creepy designs and creepy animations. It does work really well there, doesn't work as well in a lot of the other expanded material, but yeah. Shion is definitely my favorite new character they've added in a long time, and I'm not just saying that because she's an Omnic, trust me. Her interactions and dynamic with Mizuki, especially in-game, have been really cool to see. Now, obviously, Mizuki's broken away from her and the Hashimoto and is working with the yokai in Overwatch right now. So, with that, we got cool interactions talking about how they see each other. Shion does view Mizuki as her son in a way, and she manipulates him as such. She's kind of like the weird evil stepmother in a sense, and deep down I think she does care, but she's obviously trying to manipulate him in many of the interactions they have. And like I said before, her relationship to the Shimadas is also something I want to point out. I'm not really sure where she stands on them. She obviously doesn't like them, but doesn't seem like she fully hates them either. They seem more like a nuisance in her side, and she just kind of wants to live with everything she wants to do. And of course, the yokai and Kiriko. She doesn't like them. I think it's pretty obvious from this story. She even made Mizuki go infiltrate the yokai. She definitely doesn't like Kiriko. There's even some really crazy fun interactions between Kiriko and Shion where they kind of just hate each other, both of them. Kiriko really doesn't like Shion, which is kind of a crazy thing because Kiriko's usually pretty upbeat with everybody or has like a kind of disgusted kind of voice, but whenever she talks to Shion in game, she sounds really down and not wanting to even initiate this conversation. Another thing to bring up with Shion is, of course, how she's fully indoctrinated herself in the human society. She's taken multiple lovers, and we find out in-game that she found Genji attractive when he looked like an Omnic, but when she found out he was a human, didn't find him as attractive. She flirts with Domina, she flirts with Sojourn, she calls a bunch of characters pretty and handsome, she even calls Lifeweaver handsome. It's really cool to see, and this character, it's really refreshing to get an Omnic that actually kind of talks about this stuff, because Ramatra and Zenyatta have never really had any of these interactions, and Bastion, of course, only really beeps, so it's cool to see that we finally have an Omnic who's a bit more into normal society. I am so happy. I can't state it enough how happy I am that we finally got another Omnic. Shion is a breath of fresh air. She's probably my favorite designed character they've added in forever. I love her kit as well. I didn't even get to talk about her kit, but amazing. I love her kit. She's been so much fun. Her design is great. Her voice acting is top-notch. Like every single line that is in this patch from her is amazing. And I am so excited to see where they take this character. Vendetta's empire is growing pretty rapidly, and with Shion, I think it's clear the Hashimoto are not here because they're friendly with Vendetta, they're here to gain. And when Vendetta eventually runs out and needs allies, and her back's against the wall, I don't know if Shion will show up. I don't think Shion will really care about anything going on with Vendetta once their deals are done, and we're going to be seeing Vendetta's ramifications and everything probably starting next season if I had to guess. We're going to start seeing that empire crumble, and this is just one example of the many things that will fall. I'm pretty curious where they're going to be taking Shion's story in the future as well, past everything with Reign of Talon. Now, we know this year is all about Talon building up their allies and getting those characters into the picture, which, by the way, happy to finally get another villain. It's been a little bit since Domino, of course. Happy to see that. So I'm curious where she's going to go in the future. The Hashimoto are not going to stay at the top of this hierarchy forever, and this story is probably going to lead to at least them being wounded a bit, in the sense of, like, they're probably going to be diminished and have to retreat, at least a little bit, I would have to guess. If they lose Toshiro, which is kind of like the big lore character for them right now, he's the one who's making the Anima tech weapons, that's going to be a huge enough blow that it's probably going to upset their stuff going on in Japan. But I don't really know how all this is going to affect Shion. She's definitely not going to die or be written out anytime soon. She's just been introduced to us, and she has such a interesting narrative story with Mizuki. I just don't know what they're going to do with her, and I'm curious to see where they're going to take her story into next year. Even when Ramatra comes back, I don't really think every Omnic character needs to be connected to Ramatra, so I doubt she would even really be important there. But I do want to see where they take her as a character going forward. That's the one thing I want to see from her comic when we eventually get that, but this kind of goes back to the idea of not really knowing where the next narrative arc is going to be, but I've made videos on that. You can go look at that on the channel. I've made so many on those. The reaction and feelings that everybody's had about Shion, her original hero trailer that came out has gotten the most views of any new hero that we've gotten since Hazard, which is kind of crazy, and even then Hazard took a couple days to get there. Shion got there in about 24 hours or a little over that, so it does show that people want more of these kind of weird characters. And I'm not just talking about Omnics either, I'm talking about Oddballs. I've debated making a video about Oddballs in general so many times, you guys have no ideas, but Oddballs are what makes Overwatch Overwatch. And I do hope that Shion and the Detective and Jetpack Cat are going to be those prime factors that lead to us getting more of those characters in the future. Because, well, the numbers speak for themselves. I've seen so much fan art of Shion, and I've seen so many people talking about her, from controversies to debating on her to just loving the idea of her to praising her and criticizing her as well. This is all really good to see, and it makes me really happy that we're able to do this with new heroes again. Omnic heroes especially, we haven't been able to have discussions about, well, since Ramatra, since he was the last one. Echo and Orisa, like I said before, are robots, they're smart AI, so they don't necessarily count, but what I mean is Omnics. So it's so refreshing we're finally getting them again. From a couple of the developer live streams that they did, you can tell the devs on the team are really excited about getting another Omnic as well, which is also really nice to see. I'm just really happy that we're at this point again where we're getting these characters. My only real critique with all of that is it's something that I mentioned in the past in another video, but I do hope we get to go back to these lore Omnic characters. There's so many rich characters in there, and most human lore characters have become heroes at this point. Emery, Demon is becoming a hero, we got Malga, we got so many of these wonderful lore characters, but we haven't got any Omnic ones. Ramatra was a character that was made way back in Overwatch 1, so he doesn't really count as starting in the lore because he was already going to be a hero when he was created, so that just leaves all these other great characters. Susie, Iggy, Case, Nameless, Zera, Lynx, those are just some of the Omnics they could do, and I hope we get to see those characters at least more in the background. All of them are really good, and because we're getting Shion and the Detective, hopefully this is going to lead to us getting at least one of these guys in game. You guys know who I would want, but who would you guys want of all the Omnic characters in the lore as well? That's something I'm pretty curious about. But those are kind of my thoughts on Shion and her story so far. When we get her comic, I'm going to be making a video on that. Depending on when this goes up, it might have already happened or not. We'll put a link below if it already did happen and you can go watch that. But I want to get my thoughts out and kind of talk about how important this is. Guys, we got another Omnic and we have a Detective on the way. This is crazy. 2 in 1 year after 5 years is... I still can't get over that, but what did you guys think? Do you guys like Shion? Do you like her backstory? You better say yes. Anyways, that's all from me. I want to hear all your thoughts on her. She's amazing. I love her. Please let me know your thoughts down below. and I'll see you guys in the next one. Hopefully we hear more about her soon. Bye!